Ladies and gentlemen, everything you are about to purchase is going to explode and become an RMA waiting to happen if you've already purchased it. From supposed driver updates causing cracked GPU cores in RX 6000 series GPUs, PlayStation 5s are leaking liquid metal if you leave them in a vertical position. And the real problem? It's extremely common for all of this to occur, at least if you believe how many of these reports are being spread around online and discussed over the past week or so. In this video then, I'd like to spend just a few minutes talking about these problems and not analysing each deeply on a case-by-case basis, but perhaps giving you all some food for thought and just, if nothing else, suggesting that perhaps we approach this stuff with a little more caution. Now, a couple of points before we get really deep into this. Ultimately, products do fail, whether it's at launch or later on, and unfortunately software and driver updates or whatever else can cause problems. Now, this is something that I've said in many videos. If you are someone who is looking at a product, I would personally wait, and this is my personal opinion, especially when it comes to, let's say, a motherboard platform, a couple of weeks before purchasing it. And the reason, because then you start to know, A, if there's any motherboard that is exhibiting issues, for example, hitting certain memory speeds or have compatibility problems, whether a CPU has any defects or problems. Graphics cards, it's the same thing. Are there any issues that, let's say, reviewers don't notice? And so on and so on. I just think it makes more sense. And that way, I believe also you get a much more meaningful insight into how these products perform in the real world. Now, this is not always possible because you may need to sell your old hardware to get the stuff or whatever else. So obviously it's on a case-by-case basis. I also want to stress that I'm not attacking any YouTubers or any websites or anyone else for talking about these problems. I do personally believe that if you are running, let's say, a YouTube channel focused on repairing stuff, I don't necessarily think it's a moral right, as in like you 100% should do it, but I do think that it's probably the right thing to do anyway to discuss issues if you've noticed a pattern, because ultimately it may help identify an issue later on. With that said, if we're talking about reports from, let's say, a repair company, ultimately the reason you send something to a repair company is for it to be repaired. That was insightful, wasn't it? My point is that you don't necessarily get enough stats to know what the defect rate is on hardware for the sake of argument. Now, with that all said, let's talk about a couple of problems, at least in brief. So first of all, a YouTube channel by the name of Chris Fix, who repairs things like graphics cards and other components, basically received around 60 Radeon RX 68 and 6900 series cards. Now, just under 50 of these were completely dead. This includes things like, for example, the metal PCB layers being just balked, the chips themselves broken. In fact, in some cases, the actual core was literally cracked. And I don't just mean like a teensy-weensy little crack where you'd need essentially like the Hubble telescope to be able to see it. I mean, even with someone such as myself with really sucky eyesight, yeah, that's a pretty cracked core. The point being that this all seemed to occur after a driver update from AMD, which is WHQL signed, might I add, was released. It's 22.11.2, and basically other reports online from, let's say, Reddit, or there's even a thread on this on Anantech, they also have stated very similar things, that this driver has seemingly caused some issues with some cards. Now, the problem, of course, is that, well, a driver, when you update a driver, there is a tiny little chance that it could cause a problem. Now, I've never had it, but ultimately, you know, hinky things can happen, or there could be some other issue that happens, like maybe it's coincidental that your PSU, or let's say your, electrical circuit at home, especially if you're not using like a UPS or something like that, just so happens to go conk. I know it's a coincidence and stuff, but coincidences, well, they do happen in real world. Now, I personally do not feel that a driver update can cause a cracked GPU core. I do not repair GPUs for a living, but I don't think it's very likely. Now, sure, voltage bursts, for example, from a driver that goes really, really hinky, really, really wrong, I could maybe see that killing the core if, for example, it puts way too much voltage or whatever into the memory controllers or whatever else. But even then, I don't exactly expect this stuff to be too prevalent. Now, switching to the PlayStation 5, yet another YouTube channel reports that, well, basically speaking, there were PlayStation 5s that they were seeing that if they were in a vertical position, were much more likely to die, and even consoles that basically hadn't really seen much use could, well, kind of die as well. Unfortunately, this again is something that was somewhat blown out of proportion. Now again, I'm not throwing anyone under the bus here, because sometimes, you know, mistakes happen, but all of this came because of a popular YouTuber by the name of The Coder. They basically were, you know, testing out the PlayStation 5, and a jailbreaking website by the name of Wololo, hopefully I pronounced that correctly, essentially misinterpreted and misquoted the person. So what they basically stated was that in the original version of the article, we misquoted The Coder in stating that the problems could impact consoles that were never unpacked. This is not what they said. What he actually said was the consoles had never been opened, as in with screwdrivers. He did not say, neither did he mean the box, but literally the console. This led to significant misunderstandings by us and the larger community. Now, of course, there are some PlayStation 5s that have had issues with, let's say, leaking liquid metal, but it's almost certainly not because the console itself was in a specific position. I.e., if the console was going to fail, it probably was going to fail regardless. And again, what this has basically done is, Wololo made a mistake, and again, everyone makes a mistake. I'm not, you know, I'm not above it. I've made mistakes. Everyone does. And obviously the YouTuber in question, it wasn't his fault, because ultimately he can only report on the findings that he, well, found, and he was misquoted anyway. What I'm basically saying to you guys is, try not to jump on conclusions initially, right? Don't let this stuff, like, be... Just try to use a little bit of, like, you know, wait and see approach. For example, remember when the RTX 4090 launched, and there were all of these reports that the GPU was catching fire, but after Nvidia did like a really in-depth investigation, there was like 50 maybe of the GPUs that were damaged, or sorry, that you know, had issues. And obviously they sold tens of thousands of cards. Now, even if you say that the reports from Nvidia were highly underreported, let's even say it was like 4 or 5 times higher than what their report actually was. Like, in other reviews were just like, you know what, I actually don't want to report the fact that my card just exploded. I'm going to take the L. I'm going to take the $2,000 and just, I'm happy to let it burn. That's cool. That's cool. That was me. I'm cool with it exploding. That's just how life goes sometimes. That still would only be like 250, 300 GPUs at the most, which is still a tiny fraction of the GPUs that are sold. And yet, of course, there were all of those reports early on that, you know, RTX 4090s were just exploding and it was terrible. And of course, we can make arguments, we can make discussions that, you know, the cable not being fully plugged in and inserted into the plug probably shouldn't cause these issues and so on. And you can argue all day long, and I'm not going to get into it whether it was a design flaw or not. You can, you know, discuss that down below. What I am saying is that the issues themselves were grossly overreported. So, personally, I would say the following. Definitely have your ear to the ground when this stuff emerges, especially if you have not purchased the product and you're considering it. Maybe wait a couple of weeks. If a driver update, for sake of argument, or a BIOS update rolls out and you're saying, okay, there are some problems here, there's BSODs, whatever, just don't update it unless it's absolutely required. For example, let's say you have a, you know, motherboard. Let's, for the sake of argument, say that you have an AM4 board, you buy a 5800 X3D, and now you need to update the BIOS, and you're like, okay, do I update the BIOS because this one causes, you know, ligma to occur? I mean, what do I do? So yeah, that's kind of my advice on things. Just have a bit more of a wait and see approach on this stuff. Again, I didn't want to talk about any specific issue too in depth because this stuff is still emerging. There are still a lot of discussions. Instead, I wanted this video to just focus on the fact that I think that when these reports come out, there is a lot of fear mongering, quite honestly. And I do think in the case of consoles, and this is my personal opinion, there's a lot of fanboyism, obviously, between Xbox and PlayStation, you know. I personally just don't get it. Like, I would, you know, even if I didn't own the console, I would never want, you know, the console to fail, because that's just sucky, because my friends might own the console, or even if they don't own the console, I don't want someone to have like a $200, $300, $500 paperweight. That's just like my personal opinion. It's kind of mean to think like that. I would always rather someone have a good time with gaming, or their hobby, or their passion. Like, you know, whether they buy Nvidia, AMD, Intel, doesn't matter. I want someone to be able to buy the product, enjoy it the best they can, and yeah, I think that's just about it. This has been a video I don't normally make. I don't normally make this type of content. Let me know if you've enjoyed it. It's, as I said, I normally report more on tech and rumors and stuff like that, but I really want to talk about this just briefly. There are some really cool stuff, projects, Jesus, I cannot speak suddenly, coming out on the channel. Things will be a lot smoother from mid next week for me. I'm, again, still in the process of moving, as many regular viewers know. So things are a little sporadic, and that's putting it very mildly, and I can only profusely apologise for those who have done moves, and you know how it can be. You know, you're just kind of like rolling with the punches. But with that said, stay safe everyone, bye for now.